When the snow fell heavy across Lancaster County, Noah Graber faced a test that no one in his community had ever expected. A deer lay trapped in the cold, and the solution came from an idea others had called impossible: his new trap design, crafted from an old tradition. But could it truly catch the prey that eluded every other hunter? Before we begin, share where you're watching from, and if stories of Amish ingenuity and simple faith speak to you, join us for tomorrow's tale. The morning air was bitter, biting into every layer of Noah Graber's woolen coat as he pulled his wide-brimmed hat low against the wind. Lancaster County, usually gentle and still in the winter months, had been transformed into a battleground of icy winds and drifting snow. His farm, nestled on the outskirts of the community, stood against a backdrop of snow-covered fields where his barn seemed little more than a shadow in the distance. Noah had always found peace in the stillness of winter. The cold did not bother him. In fact, it felt as though the earth itself had quieted, leaving room for thought, for faith. But today, the peace was different. It had been 2 weeks since the first snowstorm had buried his farm, and with each day, the scarcity of food for his family grew more evident. His pantry, filled to the brim with preserves, had begun to thin. The carrots, the potatoes, small harvests that would only stretch so far. His thoughts kept returning to the deer he had spotted on his way out of town. The tracks in the fresh snow had been clear, leading him to a clearing in the forest where the deer had been resting. The problem wasn't the deer itself, it was that no trap or net could catch such a creature in such conditions. The thick snow made it nearly impossible for traditional hunting methods to succeed. His father's old trap had caught many an animal, but it seemed useless now. Noah bent down by his workbench, where tools and pieces of wood lay scattered. He had been pondering a new idea, something that, at first, had seemed ludicrous. His mind went back to his grandfather's teachings, to stories of simple solutions used by generations before him. What if, instead of pursuing the deer, he could create something that would bring the deer to him? Not a typical net or snare, but something that combined patience with ingenuity. The idea had been simple at first, but as the days wore on, it began to take shape. A spring-loaded device, designed to fold and trap, based on the old knowledge his grandfather had passed down about snares and pressure points. But this was different, a trap that used the snow itself as a cover, the way the wind hid the mountain paths. It was a design so simple it seemed almost impossible. Noah had worked through the night, hands sore from cutting, shaping, and tying. He had never been one to shy away from labor. His hands were as much a part of the land as the soil beneath them. But as dawn broke and light began to spill over the horizon, he stood back to admire the trap. It was simple in construction but brilliant in its execution. A series of wooden levers, connected to a pressure plate, and a single thick rope that, when triggered, would pull the deer into the trap faster than it could react. For hours, Noah had carefully positioned it in the same clearing where he had seen the tracks. The snow had covered his footprints, and with the trap hidden under a blanket of fresh powder, it was nearly invisible to any wandering animal. As he made his way back to the farmhouse, Noah felt a quiet anticipation. The trap was set, but it wasn't just the trap that filled his heart with hope, it was the faith he held in the designs of the past, in the lessons of simplicity that had been handed down through generations of his family. He had worked with his hands, but it was God's will that would guide him through. The thought of returning home for a warm meal and the sounds of his children playing around the hearth brought him comfort. His wife, Rachel, had taken extra care with the meals recently, understanding the quiet concern Noah had tried to mask. She had seen the worry in his eyes, but she knew, as he did, that sometimes the best solutions were the quietest ones, the ones found not in the rush, but in the stillness. The day passed slowly, and as night fell, the storm had picked up again. Snow blew in every direction, the winds cutting through the air. Noah could see little more than a few feet in front of him as he made his way back to the forest. He had a strange sense of peace, a quiet certainty that the trap would hold, that this winter's struggle would soon be over. As he approached the clearing, his heart caught in his chest. The trap had been sprung, but what he found wasn't just a deer, it was something far greater. Noah stepped into the clearing, his boots crunching softly in the deep snow. The world around him was silent, save for the howling wind that seemed to hold its breath as he approached the trap. There, beneath the cover of snow and branches, lay the deer caught perfectly in his design. It was a young doe, its fur soft and glistening with frost, and its eyes wide with an almost peaceful expression. It had not struggled. The trap had worked exactly as he had hoped. The deer had walked into the pressure point, unaware of the delicate mechanism that lay hidden beneath the snow. Noah paused, taking a deep breath. He felt a moment of profound gratitude, a rare silence before the storm of his thoughts. This was more than just a meal. This was a testament to his faith in the knowledge of the past, the quiet persistence of the land, and the hope that even in the harshest winters, the right decisions would yield the most unexpected rewards. He knelt beside the doe, his weathered hands gently brushing the snow away to examine the trap. The wooden levers, the rope, the pressure plate all had held firm. It was simple, it was quiet, but it was effective. The design had seemed impossible to his neighbors, who would have scoffed at such an intricate method. Yet here it was, a testament to the wisdom of slowing down, thinking deeply, and trusting in the ways of old. Noah carefully untangled the ropes that held the deer in place, knowing that the next few hours would be spent preparing the meat for his family. They would feast tonight, and more than that, they would see that the farm could endure the winter. As he worked, the wind began to die down, and the clouds parted just enough to reveal the last traces of daylight. The storm had passed, and with it came a sense of peace. A peace that Noah had earned through patience and the quiet faith that had guided him from the moment he had crafted the trap. He thought of Rachel, of his children, and the small comforts they had shared by the fire during these long, cold days. They would have food now, and they would know, even in their quiet lives, that survival wasn't about the speed with which you act, but about the careful, deliberate decisions you make. His trap, built slowly and with purpose, had proven that sometimes the best solutions are the ones that seem impossible at first. As Noah returned to the farmhouse, the fading light of evening casting long shadows over the snow, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle within him. The deer was now in the cellar, carefully butchered and ready for the winter ahead. The meat would sustain them for weeks, and the rest of the community, struggling in the same harsh conditions, would no doubt marvel at how he had managed to catch the elusive deer. But for Noah, it wasn't just about the hunt, it was about the knowledge, the quiet wisdom, and the unspoken lesson that had led him to this moment. Rachel stood in the doorway, watching as he approached with the familiar warmth of a smile on her face. She could see the weariness in his steps, the exhaustion from a long day spent in the cold, but there was something else in his eyes, a quiet joy, an unspoken pride that filled the air between them. "You found it," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The smell of fresh bread and stew filled the house, offering a warmth that Noah appreciated more than he could express. His family had endured these harsh winters together, always with the knowledge that their survival depended on each other, on faith, and on the simplicity of their way of life. Noah nodded, removing his gloves and settling by the fire. He reached for the cup of tea Rachel had set aside for him, the steam rising in delicate swirls before it met his face. "I did," he replied simply. "The trap worked, just like I thought." Rachel smiled softly, her hands moving to prepare a place for him at the table. "I knew it would," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. She had seen the determination in his eyes when he had explained the design when the others had laughed and called it impossible. She had believed in him, in his faith, and in the wisdom he carried with him from his ancestors. That evening, as they sat around the table, Noah spoke little of the trap or the deer. There was no need. The real reward wasn't in the success of the hunt, but in the lessons that had come from it. His children listened, wide-eyed, as Noah shared stories of his grandfather and the old ways of the Amish simple methods that had stood the test of time. They would grow up in a world that moved faster, a world that demanded more, but Noah hoped they would carry the lesson with them, that there was always value in simplicity, in the quiet, steady work of building, of trusting the old ways, of making decisions that honored the land, the family, and the community. As the night drew on and the wind began to howl once more outside, Noah leaned back in his chair, his heart full. The storm would pass, as it always did. And when the next one came, he knew that they would be ready not just because of the trap he had set, but because they understood that survival was about more than just reacting to circumstances. It was about building what could last. It was about being patient and trusting in the quiet strength that came from faith, from simplicity, and from knowing that sometimes the hardest challenges were the ones that asked the simplest questions. And Noah, with his impossible design, had shown them all how powerful that truth could be. Weeks passed, and the winter tightened its grip on Lancaster County, burying the land in snow that rose higher than the rooftops and winds that howled like wolves in the night. Yet, in the warmth of the Graber farmhouse, life went on steady, unyielding, and full of quiet faith. The deer that Noah had caught provided more than enough for his family, but the lesson, the legacy of that trap, had become something deeper, something that would stay with them long after the snow melted. As the seasons shifted, whispers of Noah's impossible design began to spread through the community. His neighbors, who had once mocked him for his slow, deliberate methods, now sought his advice. There was a change in the air, a hum of respect for the man who had, against the odds, built something that worked. They came to him with questions not just about trapping or hunting, but about life itself. How had he known to build for the worst when everyone else had been content with the bare minimum? Noah never claimed to have all the answers, but he shared what he knew, always with humility. The wisdom of the land, passed down from generations, had always told him that survival wasn't about speed or strength, it was about foresight. It was about knowing the land, understanding its rhythms, and making decisions not based on the moment, but on the long road ahead. That was what had guided him to build a trap that had seemed impossible, and that was what had sustained his family through a harsh winter. One evening, as Noah sat with Rachel by the fire, a knock came at the door. It was Samuel Weaver, a farmer who lived a few miles down the road. He had been one of the first to laugh at Noah's idea, but now, with winter stretching endlessly before him and his own traps failing to catch enough game, he was here, asking for help. "I've seen the way things have turned out for you, Noah," Samuel said, standing awkwardly by the door. "I've tried the old ways, the ones that have worked for years, but I think I've been wrong. Could you show me? Could you teach me what you did?" Noah rose from his chair, his boots leaving quiet prints on the wooden floor, as he crossed to where Samuel stood. There was no judgment in his eyes, only the quiet understanding that had always marked his actions. "Of course," he said simply. "Come, sit by the fire. I'll tell you all I know." That night, as the snow continued to fall outside, Noah shared the design of his trap with Samuel. He explained how he had studied the land, the ways the deer moved, and the pressure points that could be used to his advantage. But more than that, he shared the lesson he had learned from his grandfather, that the world didn't reward haste, but patience. It didn't honor those who rushed, but those who took the time to build something lasting. By the time Samuel left, he had a plan in hand and a new understanding of what it meant to live on the land. And though Noah knew the trap he had set was just one small part of the larger story, it had become something far greater than the sum of its parts. It had become a symbol of faith, of trusting in the simple, quiet ways of the Amish, even in the face of adversity. As spring began to thaw the frozen earth, Noah stood at the edge of the field, watching as the first flowers of the season began to bloom. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that his family had made it through the hardest winter they had ever known. The snow had fallen heavy, but it had not broken them. They had built something together, something that would last, through storms and through time. And as he looked out over the land, Noah knew that the true legacy of his trap was not in the deer it had caught, but in the way it had brought his community together, teaching them that sometimes the impossible was only a matter of taking the time to build something that could withstand even the harshest of winters.